Ladies and gentlemen, this is Professor Hamamoto on January 17, Sunday, and we're at 6:03 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And today we have the pleasure of our guest, Mr. Vin Ho, who is speaking to us from Saigon, officially known as Ho Chi Minh City. Vin, it's been a long time, what, almost 3 years?
Yes, 3 years since I last saw you in Da Nang at the academic conference. Very enjoyable time.
Wonderful. And I understand you filmed the entire proceedings of that historic moment.
Yes,
Is that
yes, it was
correct?
very interesting.
Okay. Now, since that time, I understand you have moved south to Saigon. But before we talk about your move, your transition to the southern part of the country of Vietnam, could you tell us a little bit about your family background? Were you born in the USA?
Yes, I was. My parents immigrated from Vietnam, and they're originally from Da Nang. And I was born in 1975, technically in St. Louis, Missouri, but I was raised in Minnesota all of my education up through college. And um, in college, I got interested in studying Asia, specifically China. And then I spent a couple of years after college teaching English in China, and then I pursued a master's in Chinese studies at the University of Hawaii in the early 2000s. And from there, I spent some time in Florida where my parents relocated. And then most recently, 2012 through 2017, I made my way back to the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. And I've always been interested in Asia, had my eye out in the region, and always heard about Vietnam growing. Lots of things happening in this part of the region of the world, and I figured, hey, I'm not getting any younger. I'm just gonna go do it. No more excuses. So I moved to 2018 to Da Nang, which is a beach city in central Vietnam, and that's where I met you about 3 years ago.
Wow, it's really a beautiful town, and I happen to live not far from the beach, within 10 minutes walking distance. It's really wonderful. And you live closer to the central city, as I recall.
Yes, you're right. I was on the city side, kind of downtown, and um, I enjoyed it. It was very kind of a very livable city, fresh air. You got that beach, ocean aspect. You don't have to deal with the pollution or the high traffic um, that you'd have to deal with in Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh City.
Okay, now Ho Chi Minh City, from what I have read, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are close to 9 million people in the city itself and about 21 million in the greater metropolitan area. That's huge. That's a large city.
Yes,
Now,
yes,
where do you live within that conurbation of cities and towns around Ho Chi Minh City?
sure. Uh, so Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon is the old name, but people still call it Saigon. It's made up of about 24 districts, and District 1 being downtown central business district where all the tourists go. And so I live in Dachau, which is just right off of District 1, um, kind of a stone's throw away. So I'm the best of both worlds. I live near a canal, so I can do my bike riding, and I also live 10 minutes away from any of the entertainment, or if I go out to hang out with friends or see a show or anything like that, I can get back to my apartment within 10 minutes. So it's great.
That's wonderful. And you're an independent business person, as I recall back in Da Nang, and you're still pursuing independent business. What's the nature of your enterprise?
Yeah, so technically, I have a day job, so I'm sourcing products in Vietnam for a Chinese trading company, and it has to do mostly with hardware, construction types of product, tools, anything that you can get at Home Depot or second or third tier uh, types of hardware stores. And then I also do e-commerce, drop shipping, which is selling products online through US manufacturers. So I also do that on the side.
Okay, and before we forget or run out of time, I would like you to give contact information for both of those major occupations of yours in case people who want to do business or commerce or somehow reach out to you for business information or maybe even a business relationship in the future. Could you give that
Sure.
to us right at the top?
Yes. I've been running a YouTube channel that used to be called Global Trade Asia. I recently changed the name to include more different things. So it's called Focus Asia Pacific. And that's a YouTube channel where you can find a lot of my content. And I naturally am producing a lot of information on Vietnam in terms of business, what's happening here, some tips and advice if you're looking to move to Vietnam in general. So that's probably the easiest way to find me.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's exactly what the type of information we need. I know for myself, with a friend of mine and myself, we are going to be doing a talk show that's
Oh,
going to have that Asian Pacific focus,
oh,
not
perfect.
just the United States and the Hawaiian Islands, which you have an experience with, but also East, Southeast Asia, perhaps even West Asia,
Ah,
because well, we're going to be speaking English primarily, but you have a huge population of English speakers. How are you able to get around, navigate that? I assume you have the language from your parents, but are you able to meld pretty well? I'm going to refer to Ho Chi Minh City as Saigon just for convenience.
sure.
Are you able to navigate it fairly well? I assume you know a pretty good, have a good grasp of Chinese language since you were there for a couple of years studying. So how does the linguistic part work for you?
Um, so I'm blessed and I'm lucky enough. I do have that Vietnamese language background where I can converse and communicate with locals here. But having said that, if you're someone from America, North America, or you just speak English, you should be okay in mostly the kind of the center of business district area, downtown, the major areas. Most young people these days here do speak pretty good English. You might have problems if you get further away, smaller towns, or maybe like an older generation might not be able to communicate with you. But having said that, for the most part, it shouldn't be a problem.
Well, that's good to know. That's I've lived for extended periods of time myself in other countries, primarily Japan, Okinawa, and I was in Da Nang for 2 months. And that's not very long, and I found Vietnam very, very easy to move, much better than in Japan.
Mm,
There's so far services, banking, and whatnot. It was a lot easier to navigate. So I assume it's probably even better with such a cosmopolitan population in Saigon
yes.
to maneuver. Now, how many, see, what is the term for in Vietnamese of individuals like yourself who immigrated to the US or Australia or something and return to Vietnam to live, to expatriate, take citizenship, whatever? What is there a generic term for that?
Yeah, so we're generally referred to as Viet Kieu, Viet, meaning Vietnamese, and then Q, Kieu, meaning abroad. So Vietnamese abroad. So that would be someone like me who lived, worked, grew up, was born in the West, and then comes back either for short or long term. That would be my designation,
I
my
see.
identity.
And there's no negative connotations to that term.
For the most part, no. But I think sometimes uh, DQ are kind of looked a little bit arrogant, maybe in a way, because we're very Americanized, Westernized, so we speak English. So some people might want to flaunt that when they're here, or just because of the disparity in terms of um, standard of living. As an American, we enjoy a higher standard of living, so we have more disposable income. So I think some locals resent that because some people do kind of flaunt that in the years in the past. So they kind of have a little bit of a negative reputation of being a little bit arrogant, a little bit flashy, a big talker type of personality.
Well, that sounds very familiar, I imagine. Now, are you part of a network of Viet Q who are in the Saigon area? Do you like go bicycling with them, or do you have a social life with them, or business relationships with them?
Um, I think it'd be more informal. I believe I don't honestly I don't know if there's like a real formal group other than like a Facebook group of some kind. Um, but mostly there's an international community that there are some VQ attend, and then outside of that, I do have a few friends, 4 or 5 that are VQ from California, from Texas that have relocated here in Saigon, and they've been living here maybe 4 or 5 or 2 years, and so we meet up every once in a while. We hang out, that type of thing.
Wow, that's wonderful. And does how does the government, either the local government in Saigon or the national government, how do they view people such as yourself, younger people via Q? Are they welcoming, or is there an official policy perhaps to attract via Q populations?
Yeah, I think it has to do. I think it's a love-hate relationship. I think in the years past, the government was open to VQ coming back for foreign investment, and then sometimes you've had that attitude problem that came with it. So there is that animosity. I think with the locals at times. I've heard. I've never had anything um, mentioned to me in any other way, but you might see it dealing with government officials. For example, if you wanted to invest and get a permit for a condo building that you were building, behind the scenes, there might be resentment. They might know your VQ. They might kind of hold the papers longer, that type of thing, give you a little bit more trouble. I've heard something like that.
Hmm. But you personally have not encountered it in your businesses.
Right. I can't think of any area. For the most part, I've been decent. Nothing has been said to me or in a hurtful way or anything like that. Um, so I've been pretty good.
Oh, that's good. Now, could you, just off the top of your head, think of any products or services that the Vietnamese people, either locally or nationally, would be interested in for trade purposes? Services such education, training, or goods like raw material or wood processing, whatever it might be. What are you specializing in, for example? We can start there and then broaden out the scope.
Sure. Well, I have been exporting like planters, home and garden types of products, light furniture. So that's some of the products I've been exporting. For the Vietnamese market here, there is a growing middle class. So just like the whole China story 15 or 20 years uh, before, um, you get this growing middle class, a consumer class. So now it's very common to see automobiles, new cars and trucks on the road that just maybe 5 years ago you didn't see as much of. So you have that uh, consumer class that's buying more luxury goods, name brands. So they love the luxury name brands, even American brands of types of products. So you have that going for it. Um, I think for services, definitely there's a big move for education. So historically, the education system has been a little bit behind the times in Vietnam. So lots of the families that do have money now are sending their kids abroad. So they're starting even earlier now. They're studying elite high schools maybe in the United States. They're going to elite colleges now, and as well as there's a big proliferation of English training schools, just like we saw decades ago in China, South Korea. Lots of Vietnamese now want to study English, so that's a big
Okay.
part of the society here.
So for young people or even people such as myself who are interested in English language education, cross-cultural communication, Saigon would be a good place to relocate. Is that what
Oh,
you're?
I think so. Yeah, there's two main cities, as you know, Hanoi, the capital of the north, which is kind of more historic government offices, that type of thing. It's kind of like the Washington D.C., whereas Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City is more like an L.A., kind of a big entrepreneurial. And I would say both cities are would be um, the best places to go to. Having said that, people, especially expats, prefer Ho Chi Minh City. It's warmer down here. You've got more foreigners down here. It's more cosmopolitan, more business friendly. So.
Mhm. And what are some of the amenities, social amenities? You said there are clubs there or restaurants. What is that scene like?
So there's two distinct areas for foreigners. One is called District 2 or Tao Dien, which is about 20-minute drive away from the city center, and that's where lots of the foreigners you'll see. It's all expat bars, restaurants, so you can get all your Western foods there. They also have some franchises, maybe like a Burger King or Buffalo Wild Wings or some others like that. And so that area has the international schools and nice luxury apartments. And so that's where a lot of the foreigners tend to congregate. And
Mhm.
then on the flip side, on the other end of town, District 7, Fumihung, is where most of the Koreans live. It's a nicer, newer development. A lot of Koreans live there. Overall, I would say uh, international foods and entertainment, it's growing in Saigon. I would say Bangkok is definitely ahead. It's not on par with maybe Singapore or Hong Kong or other cosmopolitan cities, but it is growing by the day, by the year. For example, you can get pretty decent pizza, burgers, and speaking of social events, there's a group called internations.org where a lot of people join and they have events there, or you can find online groups. And I would say there's the Compass Cafe, which is run by an Aussie fella, Mark Boyer here, Old Compass Cafe, and it's kind of a small, quaint area, but it has lots of kind of the presentations on maybe war history or someone that's visiting, coming through, a professor, a special speaker. That would be a venue where people would go and watch and hear a speaker.
Okay, that gives us a pretty good run. You can tell I have not been to Saigon, but I plan on it. The
Great.
sooner the better.
Yeah,
So what is the transportation? I know in Da Nang and Hanoi, lots of motor scooters, which is cool, but better than cars. But what's the how do you get to these prime areas where you can hang out and is there buses, it's subway system, light rail, or what are the different modes of transport? And what you're into bicycling, I know, not just
right.
practically, but you do it for exercise and recreation. What's the transportation culture like in Saigon,
Yes.
Ho Chi Minh City?
Yeah, Daryl, you're right on. Vietnam is known for their motorbikes, and Saigon is no exception. It's a sea of motorbikes, as you'll see. There are some public buses. Uh, the locals mostly use those, and it's very, very cheap, very reasonable, maybe 25 cents one way. Um, and then now, as I mentioned, it's a growing middle class, so you see a lot of automobiles. It's kind of a common scene more and more, despite the roads being pretty tight. And um, on the horizon is a light rail or subway system that's being built. So a first line from Tao Dien District 2, which I had mentioned, to the city center is being built, and it has an opening date of maybe, I think, end of this year, maybe in the next year. So that's happening. But having said that, there's something called Grab, which is our Uber equivalent. So
Oh,
Grab is an app and it's I believe an Indonesian company, but then open their services here, and it's you can go by Grab Bike, where a motor bike taxi will come pick you up, or a Grab car. So if you're with two people or you're with a group of people, and and the best part is it's so reasonable, and it's such a popular service that there's always um, a Grab person ready to take you it's very cheap. Literally every ride is maybe for me 85 cents or dollar 50 for a car ride, a 10-minute car ride. Maybe the most, maybe a $4 car ride one way,
mm,
and that's very reliable. Um, and that's how I travel because it's safe and they drop you off. You don't have to worry about your motor scooter getting stolen or where to park.
uh,
Um, and so that's probably the easiest way to get around. So I'd recommend if you're visiting or staying long term, Grab app was just the easiest way to go.
okay. Now I'm familiar with Grab. Those are the green colored vehicles, right? The-
Yes, the green colored vehicles,
Right.
very fast, efficient, cheap. really never. I think I've gone over 100, rides, I'm sure, and then there's very rare that you get any kind of bad experience. So
Yeah, I didn't have a single one, and they will pick you up on a motorcycle if you're willing to, and they're very fast. And they, at least in Da Nang, they were able. They knew wherever I asked, they could go right to it. If you have like, it helps if you have perhaps a written address you can show them, and they can,
sure,
or show them your hotel key, for example. That's a fast way, or card, you know.
right.
Right.
And the one advantage of the Grab app is that if you put your credit card information, it'll take it from that. It'll withdraw from
Oh,
that, so that it's just a push of a button. It's seamless. You get there, you get dropped off. You don't have to, dig into your pockets to find some cash, and then you wait for change or anything like that. So it's just very seamless.
hmm, wonderful. Yeah, I noticed that even at the supermarkets, and there was one major one in the Da Nang area. Transportation was not a problem. I could just pick up a Grab and just take all my bags home. So you don't need a vehicle. You don't even need a motor scooter or a bicycle in order to get around. Sounds like the quality of life is very high. What about the health care, especially for expats? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, healthcare, I think in the past, hospitals, clinics have been lacking maybe 10, 15 years ago, but they're getting better. And in fact, uh, I think just a few years ago, there was a few um, more expat-friendly hospitals where they maybe were trained in the West, they speak English, they have this very similar quality as you'd expect somewhere in America.
Hmm.
And they have the local clinics also, and I think they've had problems in the past where they're kind of poor quality. It was crowded, but overall, what I've seen and experienced has been a good overall. I've really had no issues. I've had um, very, very reasonable pricing. For example, if you could believe in America, I pay about 145 US dollars for a teeth cleaning. That's with insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Here, I pay $4.22 for great service, new facilities, maybe two or three people working, and I could not tell the difference in terms of quality. It's about a 45-minute service, so that's a big savings right there. I had a checkup. I can't remember. Maybe I had a full checkup with everything, the whole works, but it was very reasonable, maybe 30 US dollars. Um, and I also have health insurance that I buy locally here, and it costs me about 360 for the whole year for health insurance, health coverage.
Hmm.
So it's very, very affordable
Yes.
for health coverage. I think what the rule of thumb is if you have like major surgery or something more serious, then you want to get that looked at in Bangkok or Singapore or Kuala Lumpur if you wanted to go that route. But for the basics, it's very, very affordable. Uh, Same thing as medicine. You'd be very, very surprised. There's pharmacies dotted throughout the city, and you can get cold medicine, any type of, basic medicine over the counter for very, very cheap. We're talking $1, $2, $3, just for types of those types of medicine.
Now, for longtime residents such as yourself, is there a requirement on the part of the government to have government health insurance? You have to enroll in the plan. This is true in Japan. If you're a long-term resident, you have to, and it is very, very inexpensive. But is there a similar requirement for you, or do you just freelance it?
I personally just freelance it. I'm not sure if there is a government mandate. But having said that, I've seen a statistics where there's 97% coverage for the local Vietnamese. So I don't know how they're requiring it or what the details are, but that's what I've heard.
And so far as banking is concerned, is it, did you find it difficult for either your personal banking or commercial accounts and setting it up and maintaining it?
It's overall it shouldn't be a problem. It's a little bit tricky in that you have to um, one, be a resident here and have like full employment, or for example, if you're an English teacher, your school would sponsor you and take care of the residency and the visa. then you'd be eligible to do banking. Um, so they have that type of requirement. Having said that, there are lots of brands, Vietcom Bank, Viettin Bank. There are a number of banking brands locally, and I think they're getting better actually. And most foreigners here obviously use various brands. For me, I still have my banking in the U.S., so I can withdraw. I use a TransferWise to um, transfer money to a local kind of a debit card, and I can withdraw from that. So that's kind of how I do a lot of my banking. Um, but for the most part, I think you can get more information on maybe YouTube. There's been people such as my friends that have reported on it, or what the recommended banks are for foreigners.
Okay, well, that sounds refreshing because it seems to be, well, my experience, and this again, it was almost 3 years ago when we met. I could go to the ATM and I can get just about any amount of cash I need, and it's still very much a cash economy. Whereas when I went to Nanjing on that very same trip where I was in Vietnam for a couple of months, it was very difficult to go to stores or the co-ops and bring cash money. You had to have a bank card, and the transportation was more difficult. It was
Oh,
less of a cash transaction type of economy. They were going to all electric
oh, in China.
in China. So
Oh, yes,
it was a big shock. It was a culture shock to me going from a cash based transactional economy, business economy in Vietnam to China. And I see the US following more the China model.
yes. I think there's lots of opportunity in fintech. They're talking about the seamless payments. China's been doing it for at least 10 years with WeChat. And then what I've been hearing is that's kind of the future. This digital banking, digital transformation. So that's another opportunity which we'll most likely see very quickly here.
In Vietnam, you're seeing movements in that direction.
Yes, there's startup technologies. What I've heard about in Southeast Asia in general, uh, I, I think it's even happening more here as opposed to the U.S. In terms of digital transformation, digital banking, fintech, where you can, uh, or we talked about where you can get a grab on your phone or pay somebody or just pay by scanning. It's moving in that direction. But like you had mentioned, your observation, yes, Vietnam currently at the moment is very heavily in a cash society. But I think in the next 5 years, things will start changing and start shifting away from that.
Now, I'm familiar with, and they're plentiful. They're all over the different branches of Vietnam banks, Vietnamese banks. What are some of the larger international banks that have and Saigon is the financial center of the country. What are some of the large international companies you're seeing?
I think the largest one that I know of is HSBC. There might be one or two others that I'm just not aware of, but for the most part, I'd say 90-95% of the time I've seen Vietnam branded banks, and I don't know if that has to do with national policy or government to where they won't allow uh, American or Western banks into the country. But so far, I've never seen like a Wells Fargo or U.S. Bank or Chase or any of those banks like that brands
Okay. Those are the
at the
consumer
moment.
banks. How about investment banking? For example, as you know, Vietnam has the French colonial history.
Mhm.
Is the Rothschild Bank, does it have a presence? Rothschild Brothers, Rothschild Fair, for example?
Uh, Not that I know of, not that I can remember.
Okay. And so far as religion's concerned, as in the South was, as you probably, well, you were from this, your family comes from the Central area, so it might be different. But the South, that was the Catholic population was very large
Hmm.
because of the mass migration that was forced in. What is the role of, let's say, the Catholic Church in the Saigon area now?
Sure. Historically, Vietnam. and Saigon in general has a strong Catholic presence. So there are churches. Notre Dame Cathedral is just downtown that you'll see. There are other different parishes throughout the city and then throughout the country that you'll see. Generally speaking, I don't know of anything or of problems or aware of anything of like suppression or what you've heard of in China, where the government kind of controls everything. The Communist Party kind of mandates everything from above. In Vietnam, for what I've seen, it seems like there's more autonomy. Again, I don't know the details or any of that, but I know that Vietnam has a rich Catholic tradition, and with the French and the missionaries,
Mhm.
400 or 500 years ago, starting off in Da Nang, Hoi An area with the
Mhm.
Jesuit missionaries there, and then spreading throughout the country. So Vietnam does have its Catholic churches. In terms of Buddhism, there's also that religion, and I think some others dotted throughout the city. I just don't know all the history of what's going on there with that. But I would say it's very tolerant, generally speaking, um, overall. I would say.
Mhm. Well, thank you for that. Now, when I was in Da Nang, I was struck. I didn't notice it at first, but I said something's really nice and pleasant about being apart from being near the beach and everything, and being in a resort area. And by the way, there are a lot of Korean tourists, mostly South Korean tourists
Yes,
that were
correct.
around. So there must be some investment going on in addition to China. But what I noticed, Vin, is that there was I don't recall seeing any policemen. They were very minimal presence. Now our capital here in Washington D.C. There's thousands of troops now camped out. They're ready and they've ringed the place out for the inauguration supposedly. That's happening in a couple days, uh, and the sight is very disturbing. Do you run encounter because that was our images of the Vietnam War. Do you encounter scenarios like that today in 2021 in Saigon?
I think my experience mirrors your observation, Daryl. I would say yes. I don't really. You don't see very many policemen on the streets. You do see traffic police often,
Yes.
and then they're doing their routine checkups, and you're making sure you have all the safety aspects, or you're using your signals, or you have mirrors on your motor scooter, or you have a helmet on, or just not breaking the basic laws. So you see that on some corners, but overall, like you said, there isn't. And other than that, there's not really a big police presence. Um, there've been protests in the past where they might have some both plainclothes police and some officers that are monitoring events and activities from uh, different areas of the city. I've heard that happening, but definitely not like what we see in our nation's capital today with military and that type of presence.
Mhm. Now, the Viet Q population who are from the USA, such as yourself, how are they perceiving the recent presidential election in the USA? You can speak from yourself or people you've talked to.
Sure, it's what I've read and learned. It seems like the VQ in America and overseas, they're very pro-Trump. And likewise, some people here, and I gather that from the comments they make on Facebook and some of the videos on YouTube, you'll see some of the kind of old guard Vietnamese that spent maybe decades in California, other parts of the America that are very pro-Trump. So I see that often. Um, and then like I mentioned, just through Facebook comments that they support Trump. So I see mostly Trump supporters overall. If I were to paint a broad yeah,
And
stroke.
how about for local Vietnamese or Saigon-based commentators, right, citizens? Are you following their political reaction, like the newspapers and the online sites about observing? Because it seems like all eyes are on America right now, given the recent
Yes.
election. What is your take on that from your position?
What
Not
I
as
can
VQ,
gather,
but just as in general.
yes, I would say that mostly, if I were to guess, it would be more pro-Trump than anything. And I think that has to do with kind of Trump's hard stance on China, because as you know, China and Vietnam has a kind of a difficult history in the past, um, and so there's kind of that animosity, that competition between the two countries, and so if someone is uh, if Vietnam, most of the Vietnamese perceive China as kind of a bully, kind of the enemy, and here's Trump that's always kind of talking. He's going to fight China, so then naturally Vietnamese have the tendency of supporting Trump, and I think they generally like someone that appears tough or speaks tough, and that appeals to them. So I think those are some of the things that resonates and turns people into Trump supporters, specifically here.
Now, is there any alarm for the increasing presence of Chinese warships, for example, off the coast of Vietnam, like in the South China Sea? And they're claiming, as you know, these different islands and Philippines, Vietnam, Japan, South Korea, they're all kind of alarmed by this heightened, especially maritime presence of the People's Republic of China. Are you getting that sort of uh, I guess, suspicion or maybe even outright hostility? Are you feeling that in Saigon?
Occasionally, you will see flare-ups, and the most recent one was in 2018, where the Vietnamese government uh, said that they were going to start, I think, various free trading zones across the country. They were going to lease them to other countries, but Vietnamese local people suspected that the Chinese were going to take advantage of that and start leasing parts of these trading zones. So Haiphong in the north, or maybe Da Nang, or parts of the south. They thought that the Chinese would kind of take advantage of their position, leverage, pay people off, and start to quote unquote colonize and lease these trading zones for 100 years. So there's a lots of backlash we saw in 2018. There was protests on the streets. Um, in fact, and I believe also there was an incident in 2014 with similar kinds of aspect, um, where the locals would get very angry at anything with kind of anti-Chinese sentiment, and was rioting and protesting even against Chinese manufacturers, Chinese-owned companies in the country. So we saw not too long ago where certain situations where that would take place.
Well, yeah, I had visited Da Nang just shortly after a major demonstration in Da Nang, and I was told this by Professor Kuling Valverde. She said, "Oh, you just," because she was there earlier, just before me. She said, "You just missed a huge demonstration," and she was explaining all the suspicion. It was like a recolonization that people were talking about. Now, you as an international businessman who triangulates Vietnam, the U.S., and you have business relationships in China, how do you navigate that professionally?
Um, yeah, I think it's most Vietnamese, I think, consider myself. Uh, they look at me more as not really local, just because my demeanor, the way I dress, the way I look. So the first bet is they think I'm either Filipino or Singaporean or Hong Kong, and then so when I speak Chinese, then they just um, know that that just confirms that they believe I'm Chinese. Um, but I think they, in a way, they might admire that I have that aspect where I'm very American, born and raised in America. I have this Chinese background, education-wise, academic, because I studied it, whereas bloodline, I'm very Vietnamese. So I think uh, I don't know what they want, what they think of me, or what they make of me, but I'm kind of outside their sphere because I'm definitely not loco.
Mhm.
So they might admire that I'm able to um, kind of navigate these three different areas, three different um, cultures, and get by that way.
Well, that's excellent to hear. You use what might be considered or maybe objectively disadvantages in the USA because you grew up in Minnesota. You were a very small minority,
Yeah.
and you know the history of Asian Americans. I mean, you don't see very many in the media or in public positions. Some women, primarily, right, actresses. but other than that, not very much. But you were able to take your multivalent heritage experience and training. I mean, you worked very hard in order to study, and and I respect you for that, for taking that, transforming it, and using it for your own as an advantage, as a personal and as a business advantage. Now,
Mhm.
do you have any sort of cognitive dissonance in that, in just on a subjective level, on being in that this sort of category of non-categoryness? Do you know what I'm saying? Like being in kind of
Yeah,
limbo?
in a way, yes, because I'm kind of I like growing up Asian American. I've always the foreigner, someone the outsider. You weren't really quote unquote you know them, and so I see that also in Vietnam because I'm not really you wouldn't see me on the streets here and mistaken me for a local here either. And I think the locals kind of perceive me as being the other or foreigner or someone different. So I guess it's perpetual foreigner. I have had that stereotype that kind of followed me, and in a way, it's kind of in limbo. I don't really fit a category, so to speak. So yes, I'm Viet Q. I'm overseas Vietnamese, but yet they know that I speak Chinese. I've got these. I do business with China. I travel there, so I don't really check off all the boxes for them.
Hmm. Well, yeah, again, I think that's an advantage. Feel something similar. If you're not in the mainstream of your home society, it's less jarring when you have similar treatment overseas because you're
Mm,
already kind of living in that nether consciousness as it is. You're still
hmm.
kind of alien from your own home country, ironically. It's not something I
Yeah,
want. It comes from the
right,
outside. But then
right.
I'm giving you my own subjective experience, like in Japan, for example. And of course, you were in Hawaii, which is very Asian Pacific as well. That was your first really outside of the continental US. What was that like, experience being at the University of Hawaii?
Yes, yes, as you mentioned, I being growing up in the Midwest in very white Minnesota, small town, and then late later years spending my graduate time in Hawaii, it was just total opposite. Hawaii is and Honolulu, as you know, is just a melting pot, and the Asian population is actually, the majority, and so it was very, very different and very kind of welcoming. I'd go to a restaurant or a cafe and I felt more welcome. I felt like I belonged there. Whereas opposed to like a small town Minnesota, if I walked into kind of a cafe, I might feel like I was perceived as like a visitor. Yeah, exactly. So someone like maybe someone I was kind of just driving through town and thought I'd come through, but not really from there.
Wow. Now, what were your parents doing there in the Midwest professionally? Your mother, your parents, or both? Did they have a family business?
Yeah, so what most Asian immigrants, specifically Vietnamese, we didn't have a nail salon, but we had a Vietnamese restaurant. So that's kind of how they made their living and raised we kids growing up in southern Minnesota. So basically, the whole pretty much typical immigrant story coming from Vietnam in 1975, right after the war, doing odd jobs until they got traction in the 80s, and then were able to open a restaurant and so that was our family business is the
No.
Asian restaurant.
From that, I assume you learned hard work and the nature of the family-based businesses, which still, I think, from what I observed in Vietnam, it's still very much family-based business. There's large corporations, yes, national and international, but the core still seems to be family-based businesses. Am I right, or
Oh, you're
off?
100% on. I think Vietnam is where you will see that distinctly. Like every business is a family-owned business, a shop. It could be like a 4 by 8 room downstairs. They might be living upstairs, but they're doing every kind of business that you can imagine. Uh, so in terms of entrepreneurship, small business, there's no better representation than coming to Vietnam and seeing it before your eyes.
I have to tell you, Van, I really love that. It
Mm.
reminded me of my childhood when there were all kinds of family businesses, or even if they were a dealer, like the local Chevrolet dealer, they were owned by a family. It wasn't
Sure.
part of some national or international. So I'm glad to hear that that's still alive and well and very robust and thriving and vital. And that's because as you might have read, most of the small family centered businesses have been shut down or severely curtailed in their activity. Restaurants and other services type industries, nail salons, for example, beauty parlors, barbershops, usually
Mm.
family run, have been really hit hard. But it's completely opposite in Vietnam.
Yes. That's probably one of the biggest stories that come out of Vietnam this past year is how the Vietnamese government was able to stamp out COVID-19. Vietnam and Asia in general did a really good job as polar opposites if you compare to how Asia did, Taiwan, Singapore, Vietnam, and China compared to the West, North America, and Europe. Uh, my last statistics I was reading, I believe it was maybe 1,000 cases of COVID-19 and under 40 deaths of a country of 100 million. So a big, big
Right.
flip side. And I think Vietnam was credited of doing so well as they had these low cost ways to deal with COVID-19. Everyone to this date still is wearing a mask, and it's mandatory in at pretty much every building you go to. They take your temperature checks, and whenever there is an outbreak or cases in the past, they would shut down the whole block, uh, quarantine the apartment building, and they would do tracing. They would follow each and every person that you had contact with. So they made really serious business uh, dealing anything with the virus here in Vietnam, and you can see the fruits of their labor, the reward they're seeing now. We're open for business. I go out on a rooftop bar last night, hanging out, taking selfies, and I send it to my friends in America, and they always ask me, "Where's the social distancing? Where's your mask? I can't believe you're out." And life is really normal here in terms of all of that.
Wow, that is so good to hear. It's so refreshing to get that comparison that
Yes.
we're living in a lockdown society here in America,
Uh,
and for this reason, and very for more, getting your personal information, your biography. This interview has been a real eye opener for me, and I can
oh,
hardly wait to fly over to Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon, and come visit you, and we'll go out to one of those rooftop bars,
oh,
and I'll buy you a
definitely.
drink and a meal.
Oh, I would. I look forward to that day. That'll be a fun time. Definitely.
Good. And so I will conclude the interview now. If you could stay with me about 10 minutes after I stop recording, I'd like to
Sure.
chat with you a little bit offline since we're on uh, Zoom here. So
Sure.
thank
No.
you very much, Mr. Vinho, from live from Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City. He's living the life of an
Thank
American expatriate. We're all going to go over there and join them and have lots of fun. All right. Thank you very much, Vin. I appreciate
thank
it.
you. Thank you, Vero. Really
All
appreciate
right.
it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Good night.